Dear Rabbi, Chodesh Tov, and thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
We're here in New York at this 22nd of April, 2015, 2nd of Nisan, to conduct this interview for my program, Profiles of Faith, with Rabbi Berel Wein, founder and director of Destiny Foundation, renowned historian, author, and above all, an inspiring teacher. Thank you, Rabbi. How do you prefer to be addressed?
Rabbi is fine, yes.
Rabbi, my theme starts with the transmission of our tradition and the changes that have occurred in the last 100 years where families had Zaydis and Bubis who infused us with the Jewish way. Today, with their generation gone, how do you see the transmission of the old tradition in the modern Orthodox world and the Jewish world at large?
The Holocaust erased an entire generation. Not only the entire generation, it erased a culture, a society that took many centuries to develop and was erased in a few years. And we've never been able to recreate it. So that what has happened is that in some sections of the Jewish world, they've recreated a fantasy world that never existed. And another thing that has occurred is that the disconnect is such that there is no connection. Jewish tradition was transmitted in the family. It was transmitted socially. It was transmitted verbally. And today it's become much more of a book process, which really doesn't capture people. Professor Chaim Soloveitchik wrote an article in the 1980s, famous article, in which he pointed out that Judaism in Eastern Europe and the Sephardic world generally was a social religion, and that in our time it's become a book religion. Book religion many times is missing spirit. It's missing. I don't remember so much my Zayda's Chidushei Torah, the innovations in Torah that he told me, as I remember him. And he became the symbol for me. He became my hero. I know you won't misunderstand it, but I remember his cigar more than his teachings, simply because of the fact that the Torah is transmitted through human beings. It says, "V'shinantam levanecha," you'll teach your children. The Torah doesn't speak about schools, it doesn't speak about universities, it doesn't speak about graduate programs, it doesn't speak about Judaic studies, it speaks about people. And because of the fact that the emphasis on people has been diminished, so it's become more problematic to transmit the tradition.
Well, interestingly, we are called Am HaSefer. We had only one Sefer, which is a Sefer Torah.
We were called Am HaSefer. Muhammad gave us that title.
Oh, really?
The people of the book. Muhammad called us that. If we are only the people of the book, then we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of books.
We do follow personalities. The problem is that the people we follow often argue with each other. When we followed Zaydis, they were just...
I don't think it's the argument so much that that's the problem today. It's the fact that they don't see people that are above the arguments, and there always were people who were above the arguments. And to a certain extent, all of us have to be above the arguments. You have to worry about the Jewish people as a whole. You have to worry, where do I fit into the Jewish people? What's my role? What's my mission? What am I supposed to be? Who am I supposed to be? So we've accomplished a great deal, don't get me wrong. It's miraculous, the rebirth of the Jewish people. I remember what we looked like after the Holocaust. I remember when the refugees came struggling into Chicago, and the mood of depression, etc. No one thought that we could make it. Well, to a great extent we have made it, but like all human endeavors, it's imperfect, so we have to try and do better. That's really what our task is.
Where did you grow up, and tell us about your Zaydas and Bobas and family?
I grew up in Chicago. I only knew one grandfather. My grandfather, Rabbi Chaim Rubenstein, was a Rav in Chicago. He was a student of Volozhin Yeshiva. He was a close, intimate friend of Rav Kook. He lived in the land of Israel in Jaffa at the turn of the 20th century. He founded a yeshiva there. And by accident, he ended up in Chicago. He was sent to collect money, which is the basic industry of the Jewish people. And he was sent to collect money in America for the Jews then in Palestine who were practically starving in 1909, 1910, 1911. And he came to Chicago, and his papers were somehow not in order, and he was arrested by the immigration authorities. Huh. And he was put into a holding prison outside of Chicago. And the Jews in South Chicago, Illinois, then needed a rabbi. So they made a deal with him. They said, we'll get you out of jail, but you have to stay, and we'll bring your family over. And so that's what happened. And then he was the Rav in South Chicago, and then he was the Rav in Chicago itself, and he was one of the founders of the Chicago Yeshiva, of the Beis Medrash LaTorah. He was Rosh Yeshiva, but I remember him as every morning he would, on the way back from shul, he would stop in our house, and I was a small child, and I would sit on his lap, and he would teach me Torah. If I ever got the right answer, he'd slip a cube of sugar in my mouth, which I can still taste the sugar. And I had a very close relationship to him, even though when I was 10, it was when he passed away. But I always wanted to be my grandfather, and to a certain extent, what I've done in my life is to try and copy him. He had a yeshiva, I made a yeshiva in Muncie. He was a rabbi, I left the law and I became a rabbi. He loved Eretz Yisrael, and he purchased land in Eretz Yisrael. I went to Eretz Yisrael, I purchased land. So, to me, it was a living example of Judaism, let's say.
So the older generation paves a path for us?
Hopefully, it depends. Many times there's a great disconnect between the older generation and the younger generation, I try to build a relationship with my grandchildren, even with my great-grandchildren, thank God. But, if I have a problem with my iPhone, they have to come and fix it. I don't know what I'm doing. But when we were talking about the big picture, everybody needs a hero. Everybody needs you see that in the sports industry. Why should people pay $250 for a jacket that has the name of somebody on it that's not me? But there are millions of people that do that. Why? Because they want to be identified with somebody whom they think is the superior person, who they think has accomplished a lot. And so it's always a question of identity. The whole sports industry is built upon identity. I'm a fan of this and this team. That's my identity. So Judaism has to be looked at, the Jewish people has to be looked at as a team. That's my identity, right?
The Jewish team.
The Jewish team, and the jacket that I put on that says on it, Moshe Rabbeinu, that's who I want to be. That's how I identify myself.
And your Zayda and your Bubis are your coach.
That's right. They're the ones that show me, what team I belong to.
Can I ask you, why is it so identified with the Zayda and the Bubis and not with the father and the mother?
The father and mother, they say that grandparents and grandchildren have a very special relationship because they have a common enemy. Parents have a difficult job, very difficult job. And the nature of children is to rebel against parents. It's been that way from the Garden of Eden onwards. And therefore, not too much later in life that one realizes and appreciates the place of parents, etc. I think that's why the Torah puts such emphasis on honoring parents, having fear of parents, awe of parents. Why? Because it's not natural. The natural thing is, the old man, Mark Twain said, when I was 16, he said my father was the dumbest man in the world, and you'd be surprised how much the old man learned by the time I was 40. So that's part of it. But grandparents, they somehow supersede that. They are above that. It's a different relationship.
So we have now grandparents. I'm a grandfather, but we're not Zaydis.
Not only that, but there was a time there was a nuclear family. People lived next to each other. I grew up 2 blocks away from my grandfather, and I saw him every day. Today, grandparents are in Florida, or in California, or in Arizona, or in Israel, right? They're a long way, they're distant figures.
Right.
And because of the fact they're distant figures, it becomes much more difficult to identify with them.
Tell us, please, how you remember yourself as a child, and when do you remember yourself feeling God independently for the first time?
Well, I grew up in Chicago. It was a very Jewish neighborhood, 98% Jewish. I was the only Shomer Shabbos on the block, out of 100 boys. And I was the rabbi's son. My father was a well-known rabbi in Chicago. And I was an only child, so I always felt I was special, right? The disadvantage of being an only child is that you're an only child. But the advantage of an only child is that you're an only child. And so I was, I was born an adult. My parents included me in everything from the moment I was born. And I always felt that somehow my family was special, that I was special. So you say, feel God. I don't know how you feel God, but I think if you feel yourself, if you have a strong self-identity, if you have a strong vision of yourself, image of yourself, so then you're feeling God, because that's the Tzelem Elokim. That's my identity is what God gave me. That's who I am. And I also had very strong parents. My mother would come home from, I went to public school. There was no Jewish school for elementary school then. So till 7th grade, I went to public school. So I would come home every day, and my father would learn with me. He taught me, by the time I was 9, I was studying Talmud with him already. But my mother would ask me, what did you learn in school today? And we went over what we learned in school, and she would say, well, that you can forget about. That part forget about. This part's important. So I always felt that, not only were they vitally interested in me, but that they really were my real teachers, and that school was secondary. School has always been secondary in my life. I don't want it to be misunderstood, but even when I went to the yeshiva was always secondary to my home. And I had great loyalty to my rabbeim, to my teachers, till none of them are alive anymore, unfortunately. And I had great teachers, but my main loyalty was to my father, and it was to my family.
Well, when we said feeling God independently, there is a God for children. Unfortunately, a lot of people grow up and they never change that God. It's the God who is a legend, who God who is going
nice old man with a white beard.
Right. But at some point, some people get a feeling of independent or intimate or connection or relationship. Hopefully it's not through fear and punishment, but maybe it's through inspiration.
I felt it when I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
I fell in love the first time I saw her. I was 19 years old. And I met her by accident. It was serendipity. I'm not a social person per se. I never was, That I saw her across the room and I said, wow.
I'm in love.
And I was. And we had a very long and happy marriage, more than a half a century till she passed away. And
how does God fit into this?
So I said, so the Lord sent her to me. Somebody sent her to me. How did that happen?
So you could see God in the daily actions of the life around
So
you.
then, from then on, people say to me, Rabbi Wein, how come you have so many stories? As I say, everybody has stories. They just don't notice them. They just don't read. But every day the Lord speaks to me. He says to me, what am I doing this interview with you? I don't need you, and you don't need me. But the Lord somehow, okay, so here I am. So I have to learn something from it. I think sensing God is, I learn something from daily experiences, from everything that occurs. That was the greatness of Hasidus, that they took things that were mundane, every day, and they saw God in it. It was the greatness of the Bali Musar, of the Musar movement. They took the smallest things and they saw God in it. If you're waiting to see God, and you can see him. I mean, you can see him in great things, right? I saw volcanoes in Hawaii, so I saw God. Or I saw on a safari in South Africa. I saw in Tanzania. I saw the migration. So you can see God. If you see 800,000 zebra in front of you, it makes an impression. But you can see God in trying to get a parking space in the lot.
Well, about the parking space, the old joke, right? When the guy says, God, if you just give me a parking spot, I'll put fill in, and the car pulls out and it says, don't worry, no need for that, right?
Because
daily life is God.
Is God, absolutely, right?
So how do you
And that's what it says about Charta B'chaim. You should choose life. So it doesn't mean only you should choose life versus death. You should choose life. Look at life. Look at what goes on in life. Look at what happens to us. And that's the idea, the entire idea of Jewish history. If a person knows what happened to us, you have to feel special. There are people that know, again, to go back to the metaphor of sports, there are people that know every season back 60, 80, 100 years, who did the New York Yankees, what their batting average is, statistics. What is so fascinating about it?
You learn from every day.
You learn from, right? And so we also have a background, right? We're coming now to Pesach. That's the whole story, right? The whole story is where we recall something that happened 3,300 years ago, right? And we make it alive.
But you're saying more than that, that every day is alive. Coming here, safe, on time, and sitting together and waking up in the morning is being...
Everything is.
So going on the other side of that coin, did you have doubts? Did you ever have doubts? Do you still have doubts?
There's no person in the world that doesn't have doubts. Things happen in life. You have a lot of tragedies. You have a lot of things that you see that don't make sense. So you have doubts, but there would not be a necessity for faith, for emunah, if there would not be doubts, right? If everything was crystal clear, so then I have no doubt that the day is clear, because I still look out the window and I see the sun is shining, the sky is blue, I know, right? But I have to believe that somehow in Hong Kong it's raining, because somebody told me that in Hong Kong it's raining. So for that, I need faith.
People were always afraid that somebody is pulling one over them. So with the absence of this inspiring generation of Zaydis, how do I know?
We connect because of empirical evidence, because of the fact that somehow, after 3,300 years, the story is still alive, the people are still alive, the names are the same, the language is the same. The simple survival of the Jewish people is itself the greatest testament to faith that exists. The fact that we're here.
What comes to mind is, as I was saying it, is how do you explain to somebody who is blind what a color, that there are colors in the world?
It's very difficult, very difficult.
So to a generation that...
But a generation can gain a perspective on the past through material that exists and through people that exist. If you've never visited the state of Israel, I don't think you can say anything about the state of Israel, because the state of Israel is an experience. If you don't experience it, then you don't know, right? It's like, be a marriage. There are people who are single people who've never had a relationship, and they're marriage counselors. Who would ever go to them, right? There's an element of logic in all of this, right? If you want to know about Judaism, so you can't go to atheists and agnostics and to people who are not Jewish or who have no Jewish experience or Jewish life and expect that they should somehow tell you what Judaism is. And that's the problem.
As a child, who inspired you mostly regarding Torah and Yiddishkeit, and who are your heroes inside and outside the Torah?
Well, naturally, the ones that inspired me were my grandfather, my father, and mother. But then I had great Rabbeim in the yeshiva. The Gemara says that they asked Rabbeinu HaKodosh, the great Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who was the editor of the Mishnah, how come he was so great? And he said he was so great because of the fact that he saw the back of Rabbi Meir. Saw the back of him. He said, if I would have seen him head on, I would have been greater. I saw the back of Eastern European Jewry. All of my teachers were Eastern European Jews. And their outlook on life, their warmth, their sense of humor, their faith, their acceptance of situations, their love that they showed us in the yeshiva. How they were, and we were a bunch of American guys. We didn't want to, I didn't want to sit and learn. I wanted to go watch the Cubs.
Yeah.
And they understood that, and they related to it.
And inside of the Torah itself?
Then when you mature a little and you know a lot, all of a sudden you start to see the layers of the Torah. The Torah is, the Gemara says, 70 faces. There's layer upon layer upon layer. So what you learn when you're 15, by the time you're 30, you're supposed to see it differently. The part of the problem is that the people are stuck with the original interpretation that was given to them as a child. I think that's one of the difficulties regarding synagogue behavior also. People bring children to shul when they're 3 years old. So that when you're 3 years old, you run around and you want candy, and and it's a good time. And so when they're 30 years old, they have the same attitude towards the synagogue.
They want Kiddush.
They want Kiddush, and they want to have a good time, and they don't want to be challenged, and they don't want to be uncomfortable, and they want it to be over and early. It's a process of maturation. You have to become older.
I'm interested in what touches your Jewish soul, and what brings out the Avat Hashem over the Yirat Hashem, and can you share with us the sense of love of God, and how can one love God who is so omnipotent, so powerful?
The love of God stems from the love of people, the love of the Jewish people. The thing that touches me the most is, when I see 50,000, 70,000 people come for the priestly blessings at the Western Wall, then I see God. And then I have a love of things. It's an emotional experience. God is, God is beyond us. And once you realize that God is beyond us, you don't feel so frustrated in dealing with Him.
Well, actually, somebody would say the opposite, because he's beyond us, he's far away. He doesn't know my problem. He doesn't understand me.
Whether He understands me or not, He made me. He created me.
But what's
I'm
personal about our relationship? If he's so big and great, he rotates galaxies.
Because He's interested in me.
How do you know?
Because I see it every day in life. I see it from what happens to me. And I see it from my body. David HaMelech said, "Mipsari echze Elokah." From my own flesh I see God. I mean, with such a complicated thing, the human body. One miracle upon another. So we only take notice of it when, God forbid, something doesn't go right.
Right.
But all the times that it goes right, we don't even think about it. My father-in-law, who also was a very, very great man, great rabbi, Rabbi Levine in Detroit. So when he was older, he had issues, cardiac issues. So he had a big professor at the University of Michigan that treated him, a very, very fine man. So he once went for a sonogram, and the professor said to him, "Rabbi Levine, look at the computer screen. Isn't that marvelous? Look at the machine that we have and we can see the heart." And my father-in-law said to him, "The sonogram, look at the heart." The heart pumps 72 times a minute. That's a pretty good machine.
Yeah.
The Kotzker Rebbe said the defining words on the matter. They asked him, where do you find God? He said, wherever you let him in. That really is what, so you can see God in our daily lives, in small things. There are people that don't want to see him at all, so, the Lord can hide from us too.
So it seems that you grew up with a lot of support in your Yiddishkeit, but many Jewish kids don't have Yiddishkeit in their life, they don't have good role models, and they're drifting. What do you tell someone who is in doubt, who doesn't know? How do you bridge the gap?
Well, the first thing is to know. First thing is basic knowledge. You can't reject something that you don't know something about.
How do you bring them? There's a kid in Skokie, in Miami, in New York, in Detroit, wherever they are. They're watching LeBron James.
Yeah, right.
But how do you bring them in?
You can watch LeBron James, but LeBron James only plays 2 hours a day. Not every day either. And there is enough Torah, there's enough Judaism on the internet, in books, in audio material, etc., that anybody that really wants to know can gain knowledge and can gain an understanding of who one is and where one fits in. How do you motivate him to do that? That's a different problem. And I don't think that problem can be solved in schools. That problem really is a societal problem. So I agree that today it's much harder than it was when I was a child. I was a child with even the distractions that we had were kosher. And today it's very, very difficult because today all restraints have been loosed. There's nothing that's taboo. There's nothing that's wrong. Everything is morally equivalent. So it's very difficult, and then therefore it's easy to walk away, because especially we're a minority, and we're a minority within the minority. So unless you have that special sense of self-worth and self-identity, then it's very difficult. I always use the metaphor of being a Chicago Cub fan, right? The Chicago Cubs haven't won in over a century. How come they fill the stadium every game? The answer is because there's, so to speak, an identity to being a Cub fan. Right. So there's an identity in being a Jew. But if you look at the overall world, I mean, why should anybody be a Jew?
So before you mentioned the word destruction, you mentioned things that are kosher and not kosher, and things that are in and out. But they say if you can't fight them, join them. And you mentioned before that God is everywhere. Why not extend the kosher range to everything? Kosher and Judaism is everywhere. I hear rabbis fighting against the internet. But if you say, listen, what you see in the internet, even the wrong thing is God made.
Listen, one of the tests in life is restraint. A person that has no restraints is not a human being anymore. All technology is neutral.
Right.
Depends what you do with it. Depends what you want to see. Depends what's involved. I don't think there's any advantage into the Jewish world to say that you're not allowed to have the internet, because I think that you're spitting in the wind. You're not going to be able to accomplish anything that way. However, we should try to do whatever is positive with it. And the same thing is true with everything in life.
How do you teach your grandchildren different than you taught your children?
I think my grandchildren relate to me more, I don't know how to put it without sounding corny, but more as a beloved figure than an authoritarian figure. And therefore, I'm able to teach them in attitude and in how we discuss things and interest in their projects. And
you're part of their life.
Part of their life. I mean, he shows me, that they colored within the lines. So, it's terrific. His mother has very little time to appreciate that he colors within the lines.
So you are the coach of the coach. The coach outside of the game.
Yeah, right. To be a grandparent is a different type of responsibility.
Who are your heroes in the Jewish leadership, past and present?
It's hard to beat the Rambam and Rashi, right? It's hard to beat Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. It's hard to beat, in my opinion, the Netziv of Volozhin, who was the Rosh Yeshiva from Izeda. It's hard to beat Rav Kook. It's hard to beat the Ponevezh Rov I knew very well, Rav Kahneman.
You're naming a team.
Each one is different. Each one is different. I cannot be Rabbi Yisrael Salanter because I don't have his mind and I don't have his genius.
Who speaks to you the most in
But
your personal?
he speaks to me. He speaks to me.
Rav Salanter.
Rav Salanter, but other ones, they all speak to me. Even the Hasidic Rabbis, the original Hasidic Rabbis speak to me a lot. My grandmother's uncle was Rav Tzadok of Lublin, the great Rabbi Rav Tzadok. In his books, he speaks to me. I think a person has to be eclectic. You got to see the whole picture. You know, Judaism is so wide-ranging. I don't think you can have only one. The Misnagdim say bitterly that the difference between them and the Chassidim is only one Rebbe. There are a lot of Rebbes. You have to be able to see the whole picture. You have to see the whole package.
Learn from everybody.
Learn from everybody. Mikol Malamdai Iskalti. And here, you know, to say this is the only one and the only way and the only idea, I think that you know, you do Judaism a disservice.
And in the past 50 years?
Again, the Ponevezh Rov, Rabbi Aaron Cutler, Rabbi Soloveitchik, the Rav Hutner, these are people that I knew, that I had the relationship with.
And the Rebbe?
Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. I did not know the Lubavitcher Rebbe. But I knew the Satmarov, who was a very positive influence in my life, even though we never discussed anything controversial. But he was a great help to me. I knew the Kapishnitzer Rebbe. I knew a lot. I was in Miami Beach at a time that it was the best time to be in Miami Beach. In Tanzania, I mentioned there's a migration twice a year, millions of animals that go walk across the plains to go to water. So naturally, the predators also are there, right? They're looking for their lunch. So in Miami Beach, when I was around Miami Beach, all the wealthy Jews came for 2 months or 3 months to the kosher hotels. So the predators also came, all the rabbis came, right? So I got to know them all. Everybody was there. And you know, that was a blessing to me. So I saw the entire spectrum. I saw one end to the other, right? And if you see the whole picture and not just part of the picture, you were a different person.
What made you join the pulpit?
When I got married, so I had to make a living, which is something which today is less true. Because today's world, people expect to be supported. It's almost an innate right that you have that somebody's going to help you. But my father didn't have any money. My father-in-law didn't have any money. My wife went to work immediately. I had to support myself. At that time, the Orthodox rabbinate in the United States was in a tremendous decline. There were 42 Orthodox synagogues in the old neighborhood in Chicago. Only 6 survived. So where am I going to get a job as a rabbi? When I was going to be a non-Orthodox rabbi, my father convinced me of that early in life, that was not a way to go, even though many rabbinic sons of Orthodox rabbis did go that way, most of the time to their detriment. And so there was a Jew in Chicago, a lawyer that was a landsman of my father, who said to my father that if I went to law school and I passed the bar, he would take me into the firm, I would clerk. So I did. So for 9 years I was a lawyer, but I hated it because I saw a lawyer sees people at their worst. Mm-hmm. It affected my marriage. It affected, I would come home depressed. And I was very successful. I made a lot of money. The last year I was a lawyer, my income tax was greater than my salary was the first year as a rabbi. But my friend and my Rebbe, Rabbi Kreisworth, insisted that I should become a rabbi. They hounded me. And when this position opened in Miami Beach, it was a small synagogue. It was 39 families in a storefront. We didn't have anything. I mean, we didn't even have the payroll for the first month. And but we moved there. It was to me it was a great experience. My children were raised there. It was a different time, and you know, and I've never looked back. I've never regretted it.
What did you take with you from all these cross fields of knowledge?
First of all, the law education was a tremendous help. And being a lawyer teaches you how to multitask, at least in my time, because you couldn't just have one client. So you had to do a lot of things, and you had to learn how to manage time. And it taught you a lot about people. I think the rabbinate is basically people. And all of that was extremely valuable experience.
Rabbi, for all your great accomplishments, you are best identified today with the popularization of Jewish history through more than 1,000 lectures heard worldwide by hundreds of thousands over a few decades. In your CDs, books, history courses, educational tours, and most recently, dramatic and documentary films, you bring the past alive. How did you get into it?
When I was in the yeshiva, maybe I was 14 years old. So we had an hour off for lunch. So the lunch lasted 3 minutes, the actual food. Believe it or not, for like 8 years, the menu was egg salad and Jell-O. That was the lunch. So I had another 57 minutes. The yeshiva had an enormous library. They even had a librarian, and I would wander into the library, and she said to me, "This is a good book you should read. This is something you should look at." And I always wondered, you know, I said, Rashi, who was Rashi? That started me, and I'm a Civil War buff. I've read hundreds of books on the American Civil War. I'm a European history buff. I'm a Jew. I've read and read and read and read. I have found that the story that's most fascinating is my own stories, the story of the Jewish people, who they were, what they were, how did it happen. And I started to give classes when I was a rabbi. And then somebody once said to me, "Why don't you record the class?" And I recorded the class, and they started to pass the tapes around. And slowly it grew and grew and grew. When I had the yeshiva in Muncie, the tapes were the second largest source of income for the yeshiva after the tuition. And we've gone along with the technology. Today it's MP3, MP4. You don't get anything. You just download it off the internet. I would estimate hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million people, have one time or another over the past 35, 40 years have heard my lectures.
So when you talked before about what's your mission, has that become your mission aside of your direct contact with few?
My mission is to tell the story of the Jewish people to the Jewish people.
So that has become bigger than your contact with your 400 people as a rabbi here or there?
Yeah, because the 400 people, as important as that is and necessary as that is, but there's a bigger world out there. And again, it was a niche that really wasn't being filled. I don't know, you know, if there would have been others. I'm very proud that a lot of the things that I've done have become imitated. When I made tapes, nobody had tapes. Now everybody has tapes.
That's great.
When I made film, nobody had film. Now everybody has film. When I made the first history tours, nobody had tours. Now everybody has tours. So I'm very flattered, you know.
What's the next thing?
I'm working on things, but I can't, until it happens, I can't reveal it. But I shouldn't say that. I have an idea. I have an idea that takes a lot of money, and you know, I don't know if I can pull it off. There's something called the Khan Academy, an Iranian by the name of Khan, who made a fortune in computers. And what he has done is on the internet, he has got a school, science, math, history, whatever you want, children can go to. So let's say you've got a chemistry professor and you don't understand what in the world he's talking about. You don't understand chemistry. You go to the Khan Academy, you look at his chemistry, and he explains it. You can play it over 50 times until you understand it. So, and then when you understand it, you go and then you're able to do well in the school. I get a call from a Jew in North Dakota. There may be 2.5 Jews in North Dakota, right? And he says he wants his child to know about Judaism. What should he do? How should he do it? So I thought that if we had on the internet a Jewish Khan Academy that taught Mishnah, that taught Talmud, that taught Hebrew, that taught Jewish history, that taught ethics, everything about Judaism, and get the best teachers in the Jewish world to do it, and post it, and it should be free, you can reach millions of people. It would be a tremendous thing.
I have a question about this. The business model of the rabbis of old was the chatzer, right? You had the court, the rabbi's court. Yeah. You moved a few miles, there was another rabbi's court, because geography required this model. Yeah. But in today's world, there's no barriers, distance barriers. So why don't Jews and Jewish organization in particular join forces?
Bureaucracy has a life of its own.
But we're not talking about bureaucracy. If you are trying to
bureaucracy.
But if you're trying to promote yourself, it's one thing. But if you're trying to promote God and the Jewish people, and
you cannot ignore human nature.
So human nature is
human nature always exists, right? The idealism is wonderful, and self-sacrifice is wonderful. But if there wouldn't be ego, nothing would happen either.
Yeah. So what did you learn beyond the obvious that connects our long and Talmudic history?
That the Lord, so to speak, plays favorites in history and has a chosen people and gave us a guidebook, and that in the long process of civilization, there is slow but steady progress. And there's a lot of hitches in the road, a lot of ups and downs, but basically we're better off now than we were at the time of the Romans. The Jewish world today is better off than it was at the beginning of the 20th century.
Definitely. There's a growing field of scholarship of Jewish history that lives outside the Jewish text. What is notable is the absence of dialogue between the scholars and orthodoxy, and is because rabbis feel that it's a heresy. What can you tell people who question the divinity of the Torah and are faced only with the non-Jewish scholarship?
Well, again, Judaism has to be experienced, you know. It's not just book knowledge, and the experience is necessary. And you can't tell people believe, because belief, doesn't do it. You can only hope that people will explore and not come to snap decisions. Now, we've done tragically over academia has a very negative history with Judaism, with the Jewish people, with Torah, etc. I remember when I went to college, it isn't something that's new. I went to college. The first course you had to take was Philosophy 101. Philosophy 101 was to ridicule the Bible. That was the whole course. But I came from a yeshiva background. So I didn't get up and argue with the professor, but I discounted everything that he said because I saw what he said was very superficial. And not only that, all the questions that he asked regarding the text of the Bible were discussed by Rashi, by the Ramban, by the Rosh. He didn't invent the wheel. That's part of the problem, is again that in today's education, these questions are not discussed, and therefore there are no answers given when it's all in the text. the first Rashi in the Torah. You know, why does the Torah begin with creation? Why doesn't the Torah begin with the first commandment? Right? Now Rashi, that's a biblical criticism question.
Right.
Right?
The first biblical criticism
That's
is
right,
biblical.
right, it's biblical. And you look in the Gemara, every question is asked. And the problem in our time is that, somehow we're afraid to ask the question, so therefore we never come to the answer. We don't discuss it even. Evolution is a point in question. There are many opinions that evolution does not contradict the Torah at all. So, I'm not troubled by evolution. I'm not troubled by it at all.
Do you think that
Greater people than I are not troubled by it.
Do you think that rabbis should educate our graduating students to deal with these views? Or because they abstain, they don't want to deal with this form of heresy?
Well, because we have a great problem, of being politically correct, and if you're a little out of the box, so then you can lose your license. And people are. I remember I had a discussion with a great rabbi about a certain very sensitive topic, and he expressed to me a very, very surprisingly lenient view. He was a very great person. So I said to him, why doesn't the Rav publicly expound his view? He said, does it bother you if I live longer? That's what he said to me. He said it in Yiddish, but he said, does it bother you if I live longer? So again, we suffer from that. No question we suffer from that. You can always be outflanked on the right.
Yeah.
And that's not only religious matters. It's you see, it goes on today in politics here in the United States. There's no Republican candidate that can be enough to the right.
Yeah.
You'll always be outflanked. Again, if you're stuck with ideologues, and you're not dealing with practicalities, but you're dealing with ideologues and what it should be, and I know what's right, and I know it, so then you'll always run into these problems.
The extremes are the ones who blow out the horns.
Well, the inmates run the asylum. That's exactly what happens.
There was a rabbi I quoted once who said that in the 60s I was on the right, in the 90s I was in the middle, in the 2000s I'm on the left, and I never changed my mind.
Changed, right. So that's what happens. We have to realize that. But again, none of these problems are new.
Yeah.
They all existed from Sinai on. Moshe Rabbeinu had his detractors, so that's the way it works.
One more question about history. Post-Second Temple era, the rabbinic period rejuvenated and possibly saved the future of Judaism. In the process, it recreated and changed our laws and rituals in many different ways. How do you contend with people who argue that change is inevitable, as it happened along in the past, and others who resist change at any cost?
Change is inevitable, but the change is within a framework. There are certain rules, right? Professional football today does not resemble professional football in the 1940s, when I grew up. Not at all. But it's the same rules. It's the same method of scoring. It's just the tactics have changed, the athletes have changed. Our problem with the non-Orthodox world is that it keeps on changing the rules. You play the game and you keep on changing the rules. That's how, so you can't have 9 players on the field in baseball, so we'll have 12 players on the field. Or, you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, the moment you start changing the rules, you don't have the game anymore.
But this is a perfect example, because the changes that happen in football happen because of change in media, because of change in attendance.
Right,
but Judaism doesn't allow changes because of format.
Judaism has changed. What are you talking?
But it's always
I'm going to tell you, if our great-grandparents would be alive today and go to Borough Park, they wouldn't recognize it.
But it changes b'diavad.
You cannot legislate change. That's part of the problem. You cannot impose it. You cannot legislate. Look what happened in Turkey. In 1922, they had a revolution. He came to power, Kemal Ataturk. He said, we're going to make a secular society, and it's going to be run by the military. So from 1922 to 2008, that's what it was. So it's going to be forever. And now today, Turkey is back again to being an Islamic state because you cannot legislate change. The people have to feel it, right? So here also, change is gradual. It occurs from within our society. You're not going to be able to impose change.
But when you come to the football, NFL, and you say, listen, today we have different in the Eastern time or Western time in attendance, you can change at the time based on those things. But when you come to Jewish authorities and you say, let's do something because of second day of Yom Tov, today we may not have those issues or other things, you have resistance, and it's fought like Horma.
First of all, you have to look at a historical basis. Those that don't have a second day Yom Tov don't have a first day Yom Tov either. Basically, they don't. The parking lot, I mean, there are non-Orthodox institutions here. I go by on Yom Tov, the parking lot is empty. They're not there. So that's a practical thing. But the other thing is that the second day of Yom Tov has hundreds of reasons for it, not one. And if you only concentrate on one of the reasons, so then you make a statement. Change comes from the bottom up, not from the top down.
Right, the Rambam, the Hasidim, all of these.
All comes from the...
So somebody said, no change comes without blood being spilled.
Well, that's an exaggeration. It doesn't have to be blood being spilled, but no change occurs without controversy.
Yes.
We can certainly say that. All right, so you have to be prepared for that. But there's no question, I mean, do you realize that less than a century ago, there was no such thing as Jewish education in the Orthodox world for women?
Yeah.
And look what happened. It's probably the greatest change in a social issue that's ever occurred. Right? And today, that battle is over.
Rabbi, there are many proposals for the preservation of Jewish life, from the Haredi side to the modern Orthodox side, in its many versions, to the conservative, reform, New Age, renewal. With great assimilation and major changes in life around you, do you see the old pattern of change happening again in our Jewish society, and can you suggest where it may take us?
I think that those that don't have a connection to Torah and tradition and to observance are going to disappear. There must be 10 million, maybe more, lost Jews already in the United States that no longer have any connection to the Jewish people. In Europe, there must be 150 million people. The whole history of the Jewish people is like that.
Assimilation.
It's a combination of assimilation, persecution, also ignorance, etc., etc. So, you can't change the pattern of history. I have to worry about myself and my family to be able to hang on to the tree. But to say that anybody has a magic solution regarding assimilation, they're fooling you.
So hanging on to the tree is your mantra.
That's right.
And the tree of life, the tree Shatul al-Mayim.
A famous letter from the Rambam to his disciple, Rabbi Yosef Ibn Eknan in Baghdad. So his disciple wrote to him and he said, the Jews in Baghdad, they're all assimilating, they're converting to Islam, we're gone. So what should we do? The Rambam wrote him back and he said as follows. He said that in the autumn, when the leaves fall off the tree, every leaf, when it falls off the tree, says, woe to the tree. The tree is going to be barren. It's without cover. It's nothing. He said, but what happens is when the winter is over and the spring comes, the tree is alive. It becomes verdant again. It has new leaves. He said, our job is to hold our leaf onto the tree. That's our job. Eitz Chaim Hila Machazikim Bo. It's a tree of life if you hold on to it. So that's what we have to do. We have to hold on, right? We have to help others hold on. We have to use tactics to be able to do so. But I don't worry so much about the tree. The tree has made it through 3,500 years. It'll make it the rest of the way too.
And if we expand the boundaries a little bit to include also people who are more loosely attached to halakha? Is it going to be a danger?
I don't know what you mean by that. I mean,
If we include,
every Jew.
well, I heard people who are not far from this area where we are, who said that there are only 1 million Jews that count, the rest don't count.
People can say whatever they say, right?
Well, it's a
free country. You can say whatever you want.
But it's a view that if you're not doing certain things, you don't belong. And
you don't belong, who decides who belongs?
that's the question.
And the question is, do you feel that whether you belong? Do you feel that that's your team? First you have to make people Jewish, then you'll make them observant. The problem today is not observance, the problem is they don't feel Jewish.
So to make them feel Jewish, you have to make them feel they belong.
And they have to make themselves feel also that they belong. That it's a team worth rooting for.
But the rabbis who are in position of leadership, don't they have to reach out?
Again, Judaism is not dependent upon rabbis.
That's true. Rabbi, I heard you talk about the yeshiva world of Hasidic Europe in the past centuries. You always make me feel like you transport me there. I believe that you have roots in it yourself. What is so special and magical about the Jewish world of Eastern Europe in the last 200, 300 years?
What's magical is that the Jews were able to create for themselves a world outside the world that they lived in.
Didn't they always do that?
That they were able somehow to create a rich Jewish life that encompassed everything and was infused with Jewish values, infused with Jewish enthusiasm and with Jewish innovation. It was a very special place. It was because of those circumstances. Those circumstances no longer exist, so it's so it's changed. The Muslim movement could only succeed when people were poor. When the Jews are affluent, and I don't preach poverty, God forbid. But in an affluent Jewish society, there's no, they know what you're talking about. It doesn't resonate. And to a certain extent, the Hasidic world also suffers greatly from affluence. And the affluence weakens the spirituality. So we have to learn how to deal with affluence. So to say everybody should be poor is not the answer. But nevertheless, to somehow lower the value of materialism, that is as great a challenge in our time as any other challenge.
So it's like you can say, how do you bring God outside the foxholes?
That's right. All right. It's the same problem. So all the problems are old problems. Everything that you want to know is mentioned in the Talmud already. It's mentioned in Tanakh already. Mentioned, if you read the words of the prophets, they don't have to change one word. They're talking to us.
A structural question about being a Jew. As Americans, we feel Americans, but we don't read the Constitution every morning. We don't sing the anthem every morning. But as Jews, we recite the Shema every morning. Why do we have to observe rather than just belong? Isn't belonging good enough?
Again, history has shown us that without reciting the Shema every day, eventually you don't belong. I don't know why, but that's the way it works. And Judaism is not a nationality. It's not a race. Judaism is a religion. A religion moves in different directions than.
It's a practice.
It's a whole different thing, and it's not an anthem, right? Whether you sing the anthem or not, maybe it doesn't make you patriotic.
Right. Rabbi, we always hear rabbis teach us to dig deeper, and the inevitable theme is always do more, devoting ourselves to do more. Why is it so important to do always more?
Because that's our self-fulfillment. I often wonder, I know somebody that has $600 million, or so he says. He's always looking for a deal. I who don't have $600 million, think in my naivete that if I had $600 million, I wouldn't do anything anymore, right? You know what I have to do? I can't, if I spent, $5,000 a day for the rest of my life, I couldn't spend $600 million. So what do I need more? The answer is that's human beings. Misha Yeshlo Mona wrote Messiah. A person that has 100 wants 200, the Gemara says. If a person has 100 million, he wants 200 million. If he has 1 billion, he wants 6 billion. The same thing is true of our spirit, of our nature, right? We always want more. So then the question is, what do I want more of? That's the question. That's what we all have to decide.
Rabbi, in light of the fact that God is merciful, caring, and all good, how do you explain pain?
I don't talk about God. The Lord has not spoken to me in the last 2 weeks. I don't know anything about him, and he remains inscrutable. And anybody that speaks for him or attempts to explain him, in my opinion, does a disservice to the Jewish people and to Judaism. The Gemara says, Alavai osi ozvu, forget about me, v'torosi shomori. Just be a mensch, do the Torah and forget about God, right? The theologians have argued it for thousands of years, and there's no clarity, and to me it's a sterile argument.
I noticed that you use the word Lord. Some people say Hashem, some people say God, some people say different things. Is there a meaning in the word Lord?
You ask Rabbi Sachs.
Well, he's the Lord of the Lords.
That's right. Is there a meaning? I don't know, whatever,
It's not a specially meaningful chosen word.
I don't, my people should not accept nuances in my statements.
On the topic of the covenant, how do you see the Jewish people's covenant with God as a moving covenant beyond the years of the Torah time?
The covenant is here always, right? Right? That's the covenant today. Look today, there's one little country in the Middle East, 6.5 million Jews in a world of 7 billion people. And the whole world is crazy with us. Why us? What's the problem? What happened to Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Iran? Nothing counts, right? Ukraine, North Korea, nothing counts in the world. We're the only ones that count.
Yeah.
So again, you have to step back and say, wow, how come?
On this topic, or close to it, what do you think will bring Mashiach?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
What does it look like?
I stay away from Messianism. I have no idea. The Rambam says the definitive thing. He says when it happens, we'll know.
Yeah.
I'm willing to settle for that.
And on the image or the picture or the idea of Olam Haba?
That's also, there are different opinions. You have the Rambam and you have others, and you have Kabbalistic ideas. You have many ideas.
Is Israel Rashid Gulta?
I would hope so, but I don't know. We'll see. You can't read God's mind, so to speak, in all of these matters. I was once by the great Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, and somebody asked him whether they can recite the prayer because it says, Reishis Smichas Gulaseinu, it's the beginning of our redemption. So he said, listen to me, he said, if it is, it is. And if it isn't, saying it won't make a difference. So then what's your problem?
Right. You have lived now in Israel for about 20 years?
Close to it, 18 years.
How do you see it?
It's a great place. It's the only place you have you say in Yiddish, it's a Yiddish Lebanon. It's the only place you have a Jewish life. Yontiv is Yontiv. It's unbelievable, Here in the United States, for instance, Shavuos is a forgotten holiday except in the Orthodox world. Doesn't exist. In Israel, the cheese companies make Shavuos for you. You don't have to do anything. 3 weeks before, all the ads on the radio, Shavuos is coming, In Israel, the whole country is up Shavuos night studying. There's a secular mishmer, there's a Marxist mishmer, there's all sorts of things, right? But it's Shavuos.
You know, it's interesting. When I grew up in Israel as a kid in the early 60s, in the secular world, the word Shabbos in Judaism was kind of not asur, but but it was an agricultural society. The only holiday we had was Shavuos.
Because of the Bikurim.
Right. It's amazing. On the concept of tikkun olam, can you make it relevant to today's world?
No. Tikkun olam is a phrase. It's not a reality. The only thing you can do is, you know, the Chafetz Chaim once said that when I was young, came to fix the world. When I got older, I realized I couldn't fix the world. I'll fix my community. And then he couldn't fix my community. I'll fix my family. And then he said, when I became old, I realized I can only fix myself.
Tikkun olam is to tikkun us. If one person is
That's
the full
right.
world,
I'm
then
the world, right? If I'm better, you know, my family is better. I do something for my neighbor. That's tikkun olam. All of these are all catchphrases, slogans. And if you look over the last 70 years of the Jewish people, you'll see one slogan after another. They all mean nothing. That's the tragedy.
if we live just to serve God, how do you remove yourself when ourselves is also what we celebrate as unique?
We're supposed to serve God. We're supposed to serve mankind. We're supposed to serve other human beings. We're supposed to serve ourselves as well. It's not because God is all-encompassing. God means all of that together. That's why we have Bein Olam L'Chavero, we have Bein Olam L'Mokum. We don't have... we don't have just cookie-cutter rules. There's a general value in life itself. If we can look at things more broadly, we can see really much more the magnificence of Judaism than if we are just narrowly focused on certain things.
One last question. How can you explain the term, make it alive to us, v'chayita b'hem?
Again, in every aspect of life, that's Judaism. In life itself is Judaism. Is everything else, everything that you do is, we're the only people in the world that have a blessing, when we relieve ourselves of natural functions. There is nothing in life that is excluded from Judaism because of the fact that we're created in the image of God, meaning that God invested us with an ability to make things holy. And everything can be made holy, and that's what it means to live.
Well, Rabbi, it is a pleasure talking to you finally.
Okay, be well, Sally. Batzlach.
Thank you so much.